Susanne Hoepfl-Wellenhofer was born in Austria and has been living and working in the U.S. since 1986. She is currently the president of the Washington, D.C. Lodge, contributes to the online School of Theosophy and the Theosophy Wiki on a regular basis. She also mentors prisoners studying theosophy while incarcerated. She has a law degree from Austria and an MA in Educational Technology and Leadership. She retired from George Washington University in DC in 2019 after 20 years as a lecturer. Welcome, Susanne.
Thank you so much for this nice introduction. And let me just go right into the presentation. So as was announced on the website, I was asked to speak about the astral light. So why should we as theosophists find out more about the astral light? First of all, anybody who studies the secret doctrine should understand what the astral light is all about. But when you study it a little bit deeper, you realize that it really is indispensable to life and to the study of spiritual science. And it is a substantial reality. It really is as real as the air we breathe or as the things that we can see. And it also explains many issues, including we make our own heaven and hell. So first, let me start with the definitions. And I know that there are participants here that know a lot more about theosophy, and there are some people who are newer. So we have to make a distinction between akasha and astral light. So the akasha is the primordial root substance that manifests after the pralaya. So pralaya is the period of non-activity. We have a manvantara. We are now in the midst of a manvantara. And after that manvantara is over, we have pralaya, which is non-activity, except maybe, some vibration. So anyhow, so that manifests after the pralaya of the universe. But the astral light is the lowest manifestation of that akasha. So it's the plane next to the physical plane, and it is usually it's invisible except to clairvoyance. So these are the septenary principles that we discuss very often in theosophy. So there are 7 planes, and we know them by the Sanskrit names and the English name. So we have the physical body, which is the Sthula Sharira, and then we have the etheric double or astral plane or astral body. I will explain this, why there are different words for this, which is the Linga Sharira. Then we have prana, the life force, kama, which is the desire, and then manas, which is the lower and the higher manas. And that is at the level of the Akashic plane. And then we have Buddhi, the spiritual soul, and Atman, the divine principle. So the cosmic substance. So Puruka was a very well-known theosophist, and he came up with a fantastic occult glossary. And I very often look up how he interprets terms. And this is what he wrote in that glossary. He said, the astral light corresponds in the case of our globe and analogically in the case of our solar system to what the Linga Sharira is the case of the individual man. Just as in man, the Linga Sharira or astral body is the vehicle or carrier of prana or life energy, so is the astral light the carrier of the cosmic life energy. To us humans, it is invisible. It's an invisible region surrounding the earth. So it's not only surrounding the human being, but also the earth. And as HBB, Helena Blavatsky expresses it, as indeed it surrounds every other physical globe. So it's not only our globe, but others. And among the 7 cosmic principles, it is the most material, excepting our physical universe. So I always like this. And Gwen Maya, some of you know her, likes this word. So astrolite is the dregs. It has been explained in some writings of the Akasha, because it is polluted by man's selfish and perverted thoughts and deeds. It's the storehouse of all human and especially psychic iniquities. And the astrolite changes not only with each Manvantara, as I explained, for those who are newer, we have Manvantara. This is when the universe is manifested, and then afterwards comes a Pralaya, and then there will be a Manvantara again. So the astrolite changes not only with each Manvantara, but also with every sub-period and planetary cycle or round. So let's look, just to get a better understanding, the Akasha versus the astrolite. So by analogy, so Akasha is eternal. The astrolite is periodic and ephemeral. So it applies to when the universe is manifested. The Akasha can be seen as the germ within the acorn, whereas the astrolite is the acorn. And the Akasha retains the thoughts of the spiritual man, whereas the astrolite retains the thoughts and the deeds of the animal man. So where does this term come from? So Eliphas Levi. Just in case you knew, the Theosophical Society also has a wiki, and I do quite a bit of research with the wiki, and Eliphas Levi was one of them, and you can find that information on the wiki. That was his pen name. He was actually born as Alphonse Louis Constant in France, and he lived from 1810 till 1875, and he was an author, and he became really, during his time, the most important esoteric writer. And he has written several books about magic, and 3 of them are very, very famous. And so he, in his view, the astrolite was a fluidic life force that fills all space and living beings. And HPB adopted the term and used it in her writings. And for example, I think if you read Isis Unveiled, she quotes him a lot, and the same as in The Secret Doctrine. So if you study her writings, you will find this name a lot. But he used the term astrolite vaguely, sometimes calling it Satan or Baphomet. He is, by the way, very well known for his drawings also. And during some time when he was young and he couldn't make any money, he had problems making money. He made a lot of money, or he survived by doing drawings. And one of the most famous one is the Baphomet, which looks exactly like the devil on the tarot card for those people, for those of you who use tarot cards. But he sometimes called it Satan, and sometimes he connected the astrolite with the Holy Ghost. So in this latter case, he must have been, when it comes to theosophical teachings, referring to the Akasha. But Akasha is a Sanskrit term, and that was not part of Eliphas Levi's vocabulary. So he admitted freely that he wasn't the first who discovered this astrolite. The ancients definitely knew this force. And if you do some research, you see that the Hindus call it prana, the Hippocrates called it vis medicatrix naturae, and the Polynesian primitives called it mana, and Hermes Trismegistus telesma. And Paracelsus, he was a Swiss doctor. He was a very advanced soul. And his writings are really amazing. He called it the Cyril light. And later on in the West, we have the German Baron Karl von Reichenbach, and in 1854 he discovered it, he named it Odic force, and he wrote a lot about it. So that's how some people have an understanding about the astral light. And most of us, and probably everybody, has heard of Franz Anton Mesmer, or mesmerism, which is animal magnetism. And this is an invisible natural force, and that Mesmer worked with. And in his teachings, it was called animal magnetism. And then Cornelius Agrippa, you might not be familiar. He was also German. And if you read chapter 14 of his book, Natural Magic, he talks about the spirit of the world. I really like that, actually. And it is exactly verbatim what Levi talks about the astral light. So Levi said about the astral light that it surrounds, it's a surrounding fluid that penetrates all things. He also said it's indifferent in itself, and it can be used for good or for evil. Another thing that I personally find very important is that the astral light is poured down at the moment of conception, and it adjusts to the soul at contact and represents the first shell, which is called either astral body or etheric double in Theosophy, even before the physical body is developed. And it is the astral light that explains the influence of the planets at birth, because it carries along their influence at this crucial moment. And the astral light performs another important function. It is a universal record keeper that registers all our desires, intentions, and acts. And I'm sure all of you have heard about the Akashic records. But let me explain a little bit more about it, because I thought that was very interesting. So the Akashic records is sometimes described as the memory of nature. The problem is that I have showed you the 7 planes, right? So there are several planes, and the subtle matter that composes the different planes of the cosmos has the ability to receive and record impressions of everything that happens on the terrestrial plane. And these records actually can be seen by some clairvoyants. But the problem is that the records on the astral plane are said to be fragmentary and unreliable. The ones preserved on the mental plane, on the higher one, right? They're much more difficult. They're more accurate. They're much more difficult to access, though. And those are the true Akashic records. And so let me explain why it's sometimes called astral body or ethereal double. If you start studying Theosophy and you first focus on the writings of HBB or Helena Blavatsky, you read The Secret Doctrine, Isis Unveiled, Key to Theosophist, or all the articles that you can find, then the astral plane or the astral body is the second one, the one after the physical body. But Annie Besant and C.W. Leadbeater, who were the second generation, described these planes, unfortunately, in a somewhat different way from Madame Blavatsky's. And they describe it as the emotional plane, where the ego experiences dreams, and on which the consciousness of the deceased person dwells immediately after physical death. Thus, the astral body is for them then the emotional body, or the Kamarupa, that's what they call. And the Linga Sharira, they renamed, because it's the double of the physical body. And whereas HBB called this the astral body, they renamed it as etheric double in the Adya. So today in the Adya tradition, that's the etheric double. So it designates the double getter or the astral body of man or animal. So usually the astral body is the emotional body. So watch out when you read Secret Doctrine or anything else written by Helena Blavatsky. You have to understand who the author is and what they are referring to. So let's look at those septenary principles again. We have the physical body, alles klar, no problems, right? And then in the Adya tradition, anything written by Leadbeater or Annie Besant or anybody afterwards is the etheric double, prana, no problem, it's the life force. And then we have the kama or the kamarupa, the astral body or the desire body. And then we have the same, the manas, the akashic plane. I hope that that makes it clearer. So when I do the research, I really have to understand things as well as can be, right? So I thought, well, is the astral light the same as the astral plane? So we have astral light, we have astral plane, we have astral body. And it makes sense that they all belong to the same principle, but I wanted to make sure. So the astral light is the planetary etheric plane. And why is it called astral light? Because it manifests itself visibly to the inner light of the clairvoyant. And then we have the astral body. That is the personal etheric plane. Now, you know, I have, for example, a girlfriend in Austria who can see only the etheric double. She cannot see more than that. And it's different than when you can see the whole aura. But anyhow, she an undeveloped man, the astral body is cloudy and it's a little bit loosely organized. You can't see the borders exactly. The average moral and intellectual man, the materials are more balanced in quality and there's a certain luminous quality. And the spiritual developed man is composed of the finest particles of each subdivision of astral matter. So basically the whole body, it has to do with vibrations. The whole body vibrates only in answer to higher emotions. So this is a book I love. For those of you who don't know, Dora van Gelder-Kunz was a student of Charles Leadbeater, who had lived for some time in Australia, and he brought young kids with him to teach them, kids that have abilities, you know, clairvoyant abilities, and he wanted to develop them. Now, she was very advanced, very clairvoyant, and started to meditate already at the age of 5, and eventually moved to Australia to study with Leadbeater. And she also developed with another doctor the therapeutic touch therapy. Anyhow, one of the books that she wrote was about the personal aura. So she, I guess, hired an artist and explained to him or her, I can't remember, what she saw. So the aura is during the process of incarnation into the physical world, the incarnating entity forms a vehicle of astral matter taken from the astral plane, which will, in the lifetime of the individual, be the seat of the emotions. This is why I explained the difference, because, of course, Dora van Gelder followed the teachings of Leadbeater, and they said that's the desire body. And clairvoyants can see this vehicle and describe it as a body of flashing colors, which vary according to the nature and intensity of the individual emotions. Now, this person, I don't know how many she had, 12 to 18 in the book, I can't remember now. But this person is a man, he's in his 50s, and he was a social and environmental activist. And he went so far even as to sacrifice his career. And you can see that the colors are very clear and deep, which implies that this man had a very strong character. Now you can see here, I hope you can see my mouse, but you can see here the yellow, which shows that he had this strong intellect. And there is some green here, and that implies that he had this compassion for other human beings. And then we see pink here on this side, and that implies that he had genuine altruism. And you see it here a little bit lower too, which tells the clairvoyant. I mean, I'm not clairvoyant, so I have to trust the people who say that, but I in general do. And I have heard many interesting things about Dora von Kunz. Anyhow, because it's here also lower, that means he's not only altruistic, which that shows here, but it shows that he's very kind to other human beings. And then you see here these trees, right? So Dora Kunz talked to him, and they show peace and harmony. And when he wanted to have this feeling of peace, of harmony, he always imagined some trees, and which I'm sure had a deeper meaning afterwards when he became an environmentalist. And then you have the blue, which shows that he had a very highly developed will. So now you can see those colors here on the bottom, right? They're very dark. And that tells us something about his childhood, that he grew up in a very repressed environment, and that he also did some manual labor. And I hope you can see this orange plume here on the left of his left leg when we look at it, right? And that shows the clairvoyant person that he has very strong convictions. And there is this danger that this strong conviction can lead to intellectual pride. And it's something that Dora von Kunz discussed with him and told him, and he immediately understood what she was talking about, and he changed himself. Anyhow, it's a wonderful book. So we know that so every person is surrounded by this etheric double, and also about the astral body, and they interpenetrate the physical body, and they extend outwards. And the etheric double about 3 to 5 inches, but the emotional field, the astral body, interpenetrates the etheric double, but extends much farther into space. And there are actually meditations and practices to make this aura extend even more. And the mental and intuitional fields similarly interpenetrate and extend beyond the emotional. So the issue is that there are actually quite a few people who can perceive the astral colors. That is not that uncommon, but to interpret what they see is not very widely developed, and it's not easy. I don't know in which book Charles Leadbeater writes about this experience. Like he had some abilities, but then the masters really wanted him to work on that. And, he was secluded and he had to practice, and it was, and for about 40 days, and it was hard work, and it was, I think, at times frustrating. So he also wrote a book called The Astral Plane. You can find that for free online. I have it in book form. And he says in there, so abandoned and so manifold is this life of the astral plane that at first it is absolutely bewildering to the neophyte. And even for the more practiced investigator, it is no easy task to attempt to classify and to catalog it. And I'll talk about this a little bit later when I talk about a current theosophist, Kurt Leland, who is a clairvoyant and who has authored quite a few books. And he talks about this experience. But he says for the psychic investigator, matters are complicated, first by the difficulty of correctly translating them from that plane to this, the recollection of what he has seen, and secondly, by the utter inadequacy of ordinary language to express much of what he has to report. This is very often, with mystics, mystical experiences, that people have a really hard time describing things. Or I just saw this last week on Tuesday, I went to see the movie Astral, After Death, and where people talk about near-death experiences, and they said it's so difficult to put their experience into words. So another thing that I personally find important is, so according to the Himalayan Academy, when the physical body dies, this automatically severs the subtle silver cord that connects the etheric double and the physical body, right? And this cord is an astral pranic thread that connects the etheric double through the navel to the physical body. So once once we die, it is disconnected. But during the out-of-body experiences, the silver cord is often seen as a cord of light connecting to the physical, astral, and spiritual bodies. So when you're alive and you do astral travel, then it can be seen. But it's connected, it stays connected to the body. So this is based on this book by Charles Leadbeater, just to help with the classification. So he talks in this book about the scenery at the beginning, but then he talks about the inhabitants of the astral plane. And he puts them in three categories: the human, the non-human, and artificial. And just for the sake of completeness, I list all of them, but I personally find some of them not as important as others. And he even says, yeah, I'm just putting this in to be complete, but it's not very relevant. So let's look first at the first category. So humans. So there are humans who still have a physical body that are on the astral plane. This is very rare. The first category he mentions are the adepts and his pupils. So these are very, they are like, we call them in theosophy, chalice. So the masters have chalice, and they have to learn certain things. And sometimes it's helpful to have a temporary body, so they might be found there. Very rare. But there are also sometimes physically developed persons who are not under the guidance of a master, and they may or may not be spiritual developed, and that they become conscious of when they are out of the body. And you can find, information about these astral travelers. Then we are there when we are sleeping and dreaming. And then, unfortunately, it's not only the adepts and the white who practice white magic, but also the black magician and his pupils could be found there, and that's also very rare. So then we have the humans that we call dead. I mean, it's just, that's how he categorizes. And most of them are in purple. The black ones are really not important. But so first of all, you can have there an Nirmanakaya. So if you're new to Theosophy, that is a very advanced soul who has earned the right to nirvana. So he could just become one with the divine, but who decides to help humanity. So they don't take this last step. Sometimes there are pupils who await reincarnation. Sometimes they don't. There's not much time between lives. There could also be somebody, I have read that from William Kwanjach. He's one of the 3 founders of the Theosophical Society, together with Helena Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott, that because they don't want to wait too long, they enter a body of a developed person or a young person who might be a teenager or an adult, and when they are dying, and take over that body. Then an ordinary person after death. So this is a huge group, and it varies in length. It all depends on the life we have led. So Helena Blavatsky called this the Kamaloka. And people who have led a pure life, they will not be there for a long time. And they will go on to what we call in Theosophy to the next level, which is Devachan, right? But the people who were greedy, people who had addictions, people who were cruel, or they were people who were very attached to anything physical. I would say that's probably the best. They might have to stay there longer. And sometimes it's explained similar to the purgatory in this phase, until they have gotten rid of all that what is vile. They have to hang out in that area, and it might not be that nice. But then eventually they just move on, and they all go. Almost all go to Devachan. And there is something called the shade, which is after the separation of the principles, the particles of astral matter from which the lower mind has not been able to disengage itself. That's floating around there in the astral plane. The shell, which is mere astral corpse in the later stages of disintegration. You might see, a clairvoyant might see that. The vitalized shell, which Leadbeater says shouldn't be even human. And then there's another category I wanted to talk a little bit more, is the suicide and the victim of sudden death. There are different texts about that I have read. For example, I want to mention something. It wasn't in this book, but I read at one point, there is a difference if you commit suicide if you are old and very ill, right? Because your time would have ended soon anyhow. But if you're young and healthy, you might be in this area until, the time where you were supposed to die. And if you were a good person, good human being, it's not going to be so much of an issue. And also the victim of the sudden death. I have read different things, like if the person was very bad or whatever, it's the same, it's a purgatory. But I also have read at one point that they might sleep through the whole thing because it was an accident. It wasn't their fault, right? It was they had no responsibility for that. It happens rarely that there is no if it's karmic, then it's a different story. Anyhow, there are variations, and then there are two. Sometimes when I give the talk, people are interested, but the vampire and the werewolf. It's very rare because they belong to an earlier root race. So those who have studied theosophy for a long time, we have globes and rounds and races and sub-races. And so they belong to a different time. Or the man in the gray world is also very rare because he holds on to fragments of the etheric level. And then, unfortunately, there's always the black magician or his pupil. So the non-human, it is a large group, and it's a great kingdom of nature. And some of these rank below humanity, some are our equals, others rise far above us. And some belong to our scheme of evolution. There have been or will be men like ourselves. Others are evolving on entirely distinct lines of their own. So we have the elementals, which are an essence belonging to our own evolution. They're even before the mineral and the plant kingdom. And then we have the astral bodies of animals, which is extremely large class. And we have the nature spirits of all kinds. Now, Paracelsus was one of the first who wrote about this. And then Leadbeater wrote about that too. We have the gnomes that have to do with the, are connected to the earth element. And then the undines, which are connected to the water elements, and the sylph, which are connected to the air elements, and the salamander, which are connected to the fire elements. And then we have the devas, which are angels. The aim of evolution is higher, and there are several classes. And the highest ones are the agents of men's karma. So anyhow, I wanted to talk a little bit about this. This is this book. It's called The Multidimensional Human. As I said, Kurt Leon is a contemporary. I saw him last in April when he gave a talk at the for the Mid-South Conference in North Carolina. Jane was there too. And so he describes in this book how he was a teenager. And, you know, he had this out-of-body experience. And it was really scary because he didn't realize what was going on. So in order to get, and all these experiences in the end led him to theosophy. But he had to do research to get a better understanding, right? And so he found a book by a man called Monroe. He wrote Far Journeys. And the reason why I mention that is because, you know, I personally always look for confirmation what I read in theosophy, in other books, or people who have nothing to do with theosophy, to see if that overlaps, right? I always look for the overlaps. And what led me to to theosophy was the book called Initiation by Elizabeth Heich. I love that book. I have read it many different times. And I was relatively young when I read this. And I wanted to find confirmation of all this I have read in this book. I took to it. I believed in it. I had no, you know, I didn't have any doubts. There were things that were very difficult to understand. It has to do with sacred geometry. And that's what brought me in the end to theosophy. But this is what he wrote in Far Journeys. He said, an innermost ring where dreamers are found, which corresponds to the lower astral plane in the theosophical system. So he describes in this book what he saw in the on the astral plane, and he categorizes it, not the way Leadbeater did, right? And then he says, but there were overlaps. He said there's a waiting ring for individuals who are about to reincarnate in physical reality, especially those who tend to return quickly. They are in the upper astral plane. And then he says there's another ring, a major ring, divided into 4 quarters, an inner, lower, upper, and outer, in which the souls of the dead are found at ever higher levels of spiritual development, the mental plane. So he could even see if the people were highly developed or not. And he continues in another part of the book, he says, a null point between the lower and upper quarters of the major ring, at its most dense on the planet's surface. He said, an outermost ring where the souls of last timers dwell, human beings who are about to complete the reincarnated growth cycle in our reality learning system. So this is like the upper mental and Buddhic plane. If you remember the 7 planes, we have there, we have the, after the karma, the desire plane, we have the lower and the higher manas, then is the Buddhic plane. So he can see. So I guess Leadbeater would call these subplanes, right? He calls it rings. I find that very interesting. And then he says an intermediate or entry-exit area where graduates from our reality learning system dwell, acting as guides and teachers for those who can reach them. Beautiful, beautifully said. Anyhow, let's get to the last group, which is so important. It's the largest class of astral entities, and it's the most important to man because they are his own creation. And the mass of semi-intelligent entities differing just like humans. So these are elementals formed unconsciously. Man doesn't know what he's doing. And elementals formed consciously, like a magician does it intentionally. And then this is why it's in black. It's not very relevant. Human artificials, they are so far removed from the course of evolution. So let me explain this with a story that I like. So I teach yoga, and I always share quotes with my students. And one of the stories that I share is there is this native, Indian, American Indian, native Indian grandfather who talks to his grandson. And he says, I have 2 wolves fighting in my head. The one is white, and he is nice and kind and friendly and generous and just has all these good qualities. And the other wolf is black, and he's nasty and cruel and mean and, these kinds of qualities. And the grandson says, well, which wolf is winning? And the grandfather says, the one I feed. Love the stories. Think of it all the time, because this is how we create these elementals, right? We can have negative thoughts, or we can have angry thoughts, and we can repeat them over and over again. And the more we repeat them, the stronger we make them. But on top of it, then we attract others that respond, elementals that respond to the same vibration, right? And so it just makes us angrier or sadder or meaner or whatever it is, right? But if we have these positive thoughts, if we have these optimistic thoughts, if we have loving and caring and compassionate thoughts, then we create these elementals, and they will be around us. And then we will attract other elementals who respond to the same vibration. So we are responsible for that. And this is one thing we have to remember every single day. Because I don't know how you are, but I remember when I was little or young and I heard that, thoughts are important. And the way it was explained is God can read your thoughts. And I thought, this is ridiculous, until, of course, I was exposed to theosophy. And it just makes total sense, because thoughts are things. And they exist on the astral plane. In fact, they exist on several planes. But this thought life of ours is at least as important as our life in the physical world. And it's something that is so, it's not known. And it is so important. And we have to practice, like if we have negative thoughts, and we catch ourselves. You see, the first step is always this awareness, right? Then we catch ourselves, and then we immediately replace these negative thoughts with positive ones. And that's how we can, we can change our aura. That's we can change what attracts us, which vibrations are we are attracting. So there are several theosophical manuals, and there's one about the astral light. And I just wanted to share the story because I find it's a simple way to grasp the concepts. But let's read what it says in the manuals. It says, our actions are determined by various emotions, ideas, and caprices, our own or other people's. And these again are determined by the latent or stored up proclivities in our minds and those of others. It is in the astral light that these proclivities are stored up. Hence, it forms the link between our doings and their fruit. We set a pendulum in motion, and it swings back at us. So the astral light may appear as a guardian angel or avenging demon, according to circumstances. And though it is, of course, an agent of the supreme deity, we are not forbidden to use our God-given intelligence in trying to understand and control its actions. Heaven helps those who help themselves. Our duty then in this respect is to recognize our fate as the equitable outcome of our merits and to avoid, as far as we can, generating any more of the undesired kind. A little bit more wordy, a little bit more complex, but I like to bring things back to the basics, and it is watch your thoughts, and then, watch your actions, watch your reactions, okay? And that's extremely important. So I mentioned Kamaloka. So if you're new to theosophy, I hope you don't get overwhelmed. Just take in what you feel is important. We never remember everything. I listen to many talks, and then there are always a few things that stick with me. I can't do it all. But she writes in the Key to Theosophy, which is a book I always recommend to people who are newer to theosophy. She said, so when we die, the first stage, as I said, is this Kamaloka, right? This lower part of the astral plane. And then when we get rid of all our desires, if we disconnect from our emotional body, we go to Devachan, which is on the mental plane. So Kamaloka is an astral locality, the limbus of scholastic theology, the Hades of the ancients, and strictly speaking, a locality only in a relative sense. It has neither a definite area nor boundary, but exists within subjective space, that is, beyond our sensuous perceptions. Still, it exists, and it is there that the astral eidolons of all the beings that have lived, animals included, await their second death. This is what it's called. It's the first death you go into Kamaloka, and then the second death you move on. For the animals, it comes with the disintegration and the entire fading out of their astral particles to the last. For the human eidolon, it begins when the Atma, Buddhi, Mana, Sik triad is said to separate itself from its lower principles or the reflection of the X-personality by falling into the Devachanic state. This is, if you're newer to theosophy, my personality is Susanne in this life. But my individuality is this part that reincarnates over and over again, this triad, this Atma, Buddhi, Manasic triad. Annie Besant wrote another little booklet that I like, Death and After. She said, if a person has led a pure life and has steadfastly striven to rise and to identify himself as the higher rather than the lower part of his nature, after shaking off all the dense body and the etheric double, and after prana has remingled with the ocean of life, and he's clothed only with the kama rupa, the desire body, the passional elements in him, being but weak and accustomed to comparatively little activity, will not be able to assert themselves strongly in Kamaloka, meaning then you can move on very quickly to the next level. So it is all depending how strong your desire body is, especially, what the attachment to all the physical elements of our life. So coming to the end, it is very important, in my opinion, to understand the astral plane. Knowing about it helps us to think properly. It tells us, explains to us that we are responsible for our thoughts, feelings, and desires that we let loose into the astral realm. We have to understand it's not only bad for us, but if we have this negative thoughts, or this anger, or this fear, we strengthen the elementals all over. That is what is so so important to understand. I mean, this can be understood. You all know I was born in Austria, and you know that Adolf Hitler was born in Austria, and and when you watch the videos, right? And when you watch the reaction of the people, this is this building up of these elementals. And the more you do, the stronger they become. And then people cannot withstand it. That's what we have to understand. Anyhow, by lifting partly the veil of the unseen world, theosophy gives us a sounder basis for conduct, a more rational appreciation of the causes of which the effects are only seen in the terrestrial world. This is one of the reasons why I love theosophy. This is one of the reasons why I study. This is one of the reasons why I like to share my knowledge, because it just is, for me, a guide on what is really important. So we have to remember that the lower, so we remember on the fifth plane, we have the mind, the manas. We have a lower mind and a higher mind. And the lower mind is an emanation from the higher manas and is of the same nature as the higher. So the lower manas closes itself with the essence of the astral light. And this astral envelope shuts it out from its parent, except through the antakarana, which is its only salvation. Break this and you become an animal. So in human beings, where this bridge, so just to clarify, the antakarana has a different meaning in Hinduism, but in theosophy, it is the bridge between the higher and the lower self. And in order to evolve, it is very important to strengthen this antakarana. And there are people where this bridge is broken and they are just, there is no spiritual guidance coming through at all. And so we have to strengthen the antakarana, since the higher manas cannot directly guide man, but only act through the lower manas. And so how do we strengthen it? 3 things: meditation, service to humanity, and studying of the scriptures, or, the texts. This is, by the way, from the esoteric instruction. So Helena Blavatsky had a group that wanted to learn more. And so she taught them, and based on these teachings were then the esoteric instruction. So we must aspire to true spiritual attitudes if we want to reach our higher self. That is very important. And these are the sources that I used for the lecture, and that is all.